We're going to take a look at replacing your spark plugs. The spark plugs are very important, and it's always a good idea to at least check them, but probably replace them once a year if you're high mileage, or certainly after every 12,000 miles. Well, it's a relatively straightforward job to do, but you can have problems with access issues, especially in the back of a VW Beetle. The back of a bay window or a split, not so bad. You've got a bit more room to move around in. Now, I would suggest that the engine is stone cold when you're doing it, because the spark plugs do get very hot, and it might be worthwhile leaving it parked up overnight beforehand and maybe even squirting some releasing fluid down over them, especially if you don't know the history of the spark plugs in the vehicle. Well, very simple tools required this time, so we'll take a look at those now. We're going to need some method of getting the spark plugs out of the vehicle, and that will usually be a spark plug, and they're nearly always a 21mm spark plug socket, and you probably have a little bit of rubber in the end of the special socket for this job, and that helps hold the spark plug in place. A selection of extension bars, possibly a universal joint, especially useful on the Beetle, and a ratchet, of course. Now, feeler gauge is important. A lot of people think you can just take a spark plug out of a box and fit it, but it's always as well to check what they are, to gap the plugs as it's known. Screwdriver for lifting it out, and just in case you need to close them up, you can always use the socket to tap on. And of course, the appropriate spark plugs for your model. Again, well worthwhile checking. If you end up with long reach plugs, you might smash the top of your pistons out. But of course, as ever, the correct units for your model are available from Just Kampers online. Well, the first job we need to do is check the actual gaps on the plugs. Now, it doesn't matter that they're brand new in a box, they can vary, and we need to make sure they're all the same and within the correct range. Now, normally on an air-cooled VW, it's between 25 to 28 thou, or that is 0.6 to 0.7 mil. And you need to check that up before we proceed. Select the appropriate feeler gauge, and it's just simply a case of sliding the feeler gauge into the end there. Now, that one I've actually cheated and already had a look at to make sure it's right, but if you do need to open them up, then it's simply a case of getting a screwdriver and very gently prying. You only need to lift it up a tiny amount and just lift it. Double check again with your feeler gauge and just make sure how you're doing. If you've made the gap too big, you can either tap it down onto a surface like this and double check, or if you're really lucky and you've got a vise to one hand, you can clamp the plug in there, put the gauge in, and then simply tap down onto it very gently, because you don't want to weaken that tip off and have it falling off inside the engine. We're just about ready to proceed. As I explained at the start, doing this job inside a Volkswagen camper is relatively easy. You should have some space around here to work on, but on a Beetle there's much more limited space. So we're showing you how to do the job on an engine that's out of a vehicle. The first thing to do will be to pull off your HT lead and just have a look down inside the end of the cap there. And if you've got a little spring that goes across, that means that you won't need the end of the spark plug here. So we can just literally undo that. Well, normally these little end pieces are loose in the box or loosely attached, but for some strange reason today they're quite tight. And you'll find that the vast majority of standard Volkswagen HT leads don't require these. And now we can remove the spark plug. Now you can see here we've got the universal joint, and also I've selected a wobble bar extension which enables the end piece here to move around. We need as much angular movement as we can get without anything falling off. That's the bog standard one there that will give you a straight throw. But remember, especially in a Beetle, this is going to be very tight, so you may be needing to come in at a funny angle, something like this. Make sure you're on undo, and then you'll probably find the first part of it is quite tight. In fact, this one is very tight. And then it should crack off. Now, if this doesn't then start coming undone, be wary. Somebody might have cross-threaded a plug in there in the past, and that could lead to problems. You may need a thread insert, but it's rare that that happens. And it's just literally a case of undoing it, and then when it comes loose, hopefully you can withdraw it in one. Well, it hasn't quite stuck into the rubber in the end here, but we can pull it out and have a look. Again, this is something where you might want to refer back to your manual. A lot of the manuals have a little guide to tell you the different colours and stuff. Well, this doesn't look too bad, it's not too far off, but another handy hint here is to put them down in an order that you'll remember where they came from. So I'm just going to put this one down on the floor, and then when all four are out, you can compare and contrast across the four spark plugs just to see if you've got any running issues on the rest of the engine. So we can fit the spark plug now, the new one that is. We've already gapped it up. We'll put it in there. Hopefully, if you've got the rubber socket in there that will hold it in, you could always cheat, use a bit of blue tack, or sometimes the cardboard that came with the spark plug will work well. So it's just a case of putting it in there, and you don't want to use any force or any pressure. This is one of those jobs that you just want to feel it as it goes in, so that it's going to take up on the threads nice and gently. So I'm not turning the ratchet, I'm just literally doing this with my hand. Now, if it's the first time you've done the job, it's probably just as well to replace the spark plugs one at a time and then put that HT lead back on again, just in case you get confused about the running order. You can always double check in your manual, but it can be a bit frustrating. And of course, the other thing to do is just to put a bit of masking tape on there and remind yourself which one. So that's finger tight, and then about another extra quarter of a turn. But again, I keep stressing, check back with your manual. Okay, the plug's in. We can now put the HT lead on and get on with the other three. Okay, well there are my four plugs in the order they came out, and checking over them, well, they look to be pretty good. But the spark plugs are one of the first things that you can investigate if the vehicle starts running a little erratically. And if you fitted, say, the spark plugs only a couple of thousand miles ago, you can always go through this process, but instead of replacing them, wire brush them up and re-gap them just to make sure everything's good. So relatively straightforward job. There are a couple of things to watch out for, making sure that you don't cross-thread the plugs when you're putting them back in, and make sure you know which HT lead lives on which plug before you go to fire the engine up, or you'll get some funny backfires. Very straightforward, spark plugs from JK, and very basic tools.